Hey guys, Felipe here. Welcome to another video. And this one's going to be a little sensitive. Hang on. All right, much better. So this video is going to be a little sensitive, as I was saying, and it kind of goes into the, as you guys can see from the title of the video, the AAV, the amphibious assault vehicle that sank in 2020, summer of 2020, as part of training for the 15th Marine Expeditionary Unit. During that time, I was on the 31st Marine Expeditionary Unit, and this impacted directly us while being on the MEU and the entire Marine Corps, because there's a whole lot of things of events that happened after that like orders came down. Nobody's getting in the water with these vehicles. They had to pass certain new requirements that they just kind of rolled out on us, and we spent a lot of money, making sure these vehicles were up to code in order to be able to, go on the ocean and do what they got to do. So I'm just gonna take this article and we're gonna run through it. I'm gonna give you guys some key points, and we're gonna kind of break down some of these things. Okay, so the article from Marine Corps Times, it says the new investigation reveals more details on fatal Marine AAV incident, and I have both articles here from the initial investigation, and so we're just gonna kind of run through it. The AAV mishap on July 30th, 2020, was a tragic mishap stemming from a confluence of events, and this investigation into a segment of those events was conducted with their sacrifices in mind, Mundy said, which was the general that was doing the investigation. So Mundy led the investigation while he was a commander of the Marine Corps Forces CENTCOM, Central Command. Ultimately, this investigation aims not to excuse or rationalize any decision or action, but to prevent similar mishaps in the future, which, they did. I think the Marine Corps did a good job at, doing a hard reset and making sure that we had everything in place after this happened, which was huge. I mean, I still feel it when I was talking about this. I feel like my heart kind of dropped, because it was a very emotional and very sensitive thing that happened, right? We lost 8 Marines and 1 sailor. So it says the initial investigation into the sinking found that faulty maintenance of the vehicle included a loose transmission drain that caused it to leak nearly all of its oil. While on San Clemente Island, the crew refilled the vehicle with oil and set off again. But the leak eventually caused the transmission to seize up. On the return trip, they kicked off a chain of events that ultimately led to the vehicle sinking, which, it's kind of unfortunate that they were just like, hey, just fill it up and we'll make it back to the ship. Um, that yeah, that's just a big what if. As the vehicle sank, the AAV driver took one deep breath from the air bubble in his compartment and attempted to escape out the back, grabbing 2 of the Marines on the way out, which one of those Marines died. All right, so we had of the Marines that passed away, and I'll have everything in the description below if you guys want to see the Marines that passed away and the sailor, and I'll also have the links to the article so you guys can go back, read this stuff if you want to on your own time. So it says the initial investigation found that a closed pool and ambiguous water evacuation orders meant that nearly all the infantry Marines in the vehicle did not have the required underwater egress training, resulting in the deaths of the 9 service members. And the 9 service members, just a quick note, none of them were over the age of 22. They were all 22 or younger. We had 3 PFCs, 3 Lance Corporals, 2 Corporals, and a Navy hospitalman. So the initial Marine Corps investigations found issues with the training that both the infantry Marines and the AAV crew received, that the vehicles given to the MEU were poorly maintained, and noted that the AAV platoon failed to go through the required pre-deployment evaluation, which likely would have caught the deficiencies and saved the lives of the Marines and sailors. Yes, why? Because they're using their own equipment. So they call it a pre-deployment workup, right? Before you deploy, before you conduct your ultimate, like what you've been training for the deployment, there's like a series of trainings, and they have a training evolution, and something planned, right? They have your TEEP. They have a plan to make sure that everybody hits these training wickets every month, every week, every month, every quarter, every year, up until the day that we are going to deploy. And one of these things is making sure that we have our egress, underwater egress training. We have our swim qualifications. And a very big one is called the MCRE. The MCRE, the Marine Corps Combat Readiness Evaluation, is like the ultimate test, right? And it's usually like starts with a 20-mile hike, and then you go into like a series of training exercises. It can be like a week-long training. The unit just each unit has like their requirements, and they're supposed to hit those requirements. For us, our MCCRE, which in 2019 it changed to something else, and I'll find it. And I'll get back into it. But the MCCRE was like a 6-week training interval, which we didn't do a 20-mile hike into that training. We did our training, and then we did the 20-mile hike at a later date. And the training was at 29 Palms, and maybe some of you are aware of that. The 6-week ITX or MCCRE, right? For us, it's supposed to simulate combat, and you're doing, you're taking orders from higher, and you're doing these missions in 29 Palms, and we're supposed to like hit certain wickets and training wickets to make sure that we show our bosses, our higher, the general of the 1st Marine Division, that hey, we are ready for combat. We are ready for the requirements that we need to deploy, right? So that's what the MCCRE is telling the higher ups, right? Saying that hey, we've met the training requirements. We know what we're doing. We're ready to go out there and kick butt. Apparently, these guys didn't do that. So second, the Marine Corps investigation resulted in the firing of Major General Robert Castavelli. So he was actually the general of 1st Marine Division, and during this time, and I guess he failed to ensure the Marines from 1st Battalion, 4th Marines, and the 3rd Amphibious Assault Battalion were properly trained before attaching to the MEU. So the way it works is that you get attached to the MEU. You don't, like, the MEU doesn't have its own infantry unit. They don't have their own AAV or combat engineer. So what happens is that they get a battalion landing team, which is what the infantry, in this case, the infantry battalion is 1st Marine, or 1st Battalion, 4th Marines. They get attached to the MEU. And then they also get subsections of other units. For example, they get an artillery platoon. They get a combat engineer platoon attached. So we take like a platoon from these other support entities, and that makes up the MEU, right? They're part of the battalion landing team. In this case, they also get a amphibious assault platoon attached to them. Now, the difference between like the 15th MEU and the 31st MEU, I think the 15th MEU has its own equipment, or they provide the equipment to them. For the 31st MEU, the Marine Expeditionary Unit, all of our equipment was already in Camp Hansen, Okinawa, which is where we like kind of do our training and get on ships and stuff and all that Gucci stuff that goes down in the MEUs. So all we take is our rifles. We take all of our basic gear, but like the vehicles, the artillery equipment, the AAVs, all that stuff is already for us in Camp Hansen, okay, or in one of those camps up there. So that's really how it works when they attach, right? They're not organically part of that Marine Expeditionary Unit. The staff at the MEU level are organically part of that unit. So, all right, it says into the infantry failures, right? So it says the AAV platoon weren't the only Marines on the water that day missing training. The initial investigation found that only 11 of the 13 service members embarked on the AAV had up-to-date swim qualifications, while the corpsmen aboard the hospitalmen may have never passed swim qual, which honestly, guys, it's kind of not uncommon. So yeah, I mean, it's not uncommon. There sometimes Marines don't pass. I'm pretty sure. I remember when I was at 2-4, we had a staff sergeant in E6 who could not pass swim qual. But this dude was huge, man. He was like a 6 foot something black dude, 230 pounds or 40 pounds, ripped 6-pack abs. Like his fucking arms were like 25 inches. Like this dude was massive, and I don't know if he was natural or not, but I won't comment on that. But so they had like there's different trainings that they're supposed to be doing. Aside from swim qualification, intermediate swim qualification, they also have the shallow water egress trainer, or SWET, that chair. The SWET, which is again your shallow water egress trainer, can replace according to this, could replace the modular amphibious egress trainer. So there's 2 trainings that you can do, right? You can do your SWET, or you can do the they call it the MET. So the modular amphibious egress trainer. I don't know what the similarities are or the differences, but for the SWET, really what it's doing is you go in a helo that's only like the body. It dunks you in the water, and there's different scenarios that you're supposed to pass. So one, you go in there, right? You're full gear, or not full gear. You're just like in your uniform. You go down there, and these guys that are down there with you with full gear, their air tanks and everything. They're teaching you guys like, hey, where you're supposed to get out of. What do you need to unclip first? If you can't see and it's dark, that's one of the scenarios. They tell you where to go, how to push the window out, right? You take your hand and you punch out like you're doing a tricep kickback. So there's all these things that go into that, and I guess some of these guys didn't have that training done. So while only 2 Marines from the battalion landing team, 1st Battalion, 4th Marines, had fully completed their underwater egress training, an issue covered up by ambiguous orders that seemed to allow for a relatively easy training to be done in place for harder submerged vehicle egress trainer if that trainer was not working. So, dude, just like I was saying, they didn't they did the helo one, but the helo one, I mean, these guys, if they're going to be riding the vehicles, they should have done the vehicle modular training. For us, when we were on the 31st MEU, before we went on the 31st MEU, we had to had 100% training completion to go over there, right? And if they didn't, like, those Marines weren't allowed to do certain things or participate in those certain things. So it says the Marine Corps has already committed to fixing that order to clarify the actual training requirements. Yeah, now they want to do that. So it says Mundy said that 1/4, so 1st Battalion, 4th Marines battalion commander, along their commander of the 1st Marine Regiment and the 1st Marine Division, all failed in ensuring the company of grunts had successfully completed their training, which is true, right? Because the 1st Marine Division is, they're like, hey, you guys are ready for combat, or you guys are ready for the MEU, the deployment, and they're supposed to hit all these wickets. And if every, you got your unit level, the battalion, you got the regiment, and you got the division. If all of them failed to make sure that they were 100% complete in all their training, I mean, that's a big no-no. I remember we would get beat up, and yeah, it was you just had to make sure you get that stuff done, because if you didn't, then like those Marines weren't qualified. And we had meetings every week on this stuff, man. We had training meetings. Hey, what's the training? When's the next training date? Like, I have Marines that haven't done it, Marines that have to retake it. I remember I had a Marine, I won't say his name, but it was Lance Corporal, and he it took him like 4 times to pass this freaking egress trainer. He would just panic when he was in the helo dunker, right? And so he just couldn't figure it out. So yeah, it's just it says, however, underwater egress training alone is not like enough. Waterborne training should incorporate not just elements of water survival and egress certification, but also repetitive evacuation drills, which would likely have been greater value in preventing the mishap. The Lieutenant General said. So yes, they should have done this training more often. I don't know. I'm kind of like on this boat that we should have done that training so much more. All right, guys. So we're jumping back now into the maintenance woes, right? So it says, though Mundy found faults with the infantry training that could have saved the lives of the 9 service members killed in the accident, most of the blame seems to fall on 3rd Assault Amphibian Battalion and its battalion commander, Lieutenant Colonel Bernese. Um, so yeah, I mean, honestly, guys, the training, sure, like honestly, a lot of that stuff is also kind of just like, hey, he barely passed, let's go, like he's done, he's met the requirement. There is no kind of like a follow on training, there is no sustainment training, especially in swim qual and the egress trainer, right? It's like a one time thing and then that's it. So I mean, Marines forget about that stuff, right? Like, I think something that some people would agree is that, like in McMap, right, like you revert back to your basic training. Like, you kind of forget a lot of that stuff. So um, it says the Marine Corps most recent investigation found that the maintenance with the 3rd AAV battalion, the 3rd Amphibian Assault Battalion, had degraded from 2017 to 2019 based on inspections from the Marine Corps Field Supply and Maintenance Analysis Office, called FASMO. Guys, if you haven't watched my other video, I explain like the different inspections that we go through at supply and maintenance entities at all the Marine Corps units. And the FASMO is one of the big ones. FASMO for us was always like a career ender, right? Like if you failed FASMO, if you did a very poor job, like they relieve you of duty, like that, like that's kind of like nail in the coffin for your career. So it says that Brent Bernese, so the battalion commander of the Third AA Battalion, um, yeah, he took command of 2018. So he had already been the CO for quite some time, right? In 2019, the inspection assessed that Third AA Battalion as non-compliant. And the way the FASMO inspection works, like you're either compliant or non-compliant. Yeah, I think they went away from the point-based system, and so they were non-compliant, and specific findings included insufficient oversight by the maintenance management officer, responsible officers, and commodity managers, ineffective internal inspections, and failure to follow up on identified discrepancies the investigation found. So I'm gonna break this down for you guys because like this was like my bread and butter, and it says insufficient oversight. So like if you guys haven't seen my other video, go watch it. It's just the one that says like the different inspections that you're gonna go through in the Marine Corps as a logistics, maintenance, and if you're in that category, all right, of jobs. So the maintenance management officer, like his job is to manage the maintenance, right? Like he is going to like connect with the responsible officers, the individuals. It's going to be either a E6, E7, E8 sometimes, and the O1, O2, O3. The ranks, those ranks is what usually is sitting in that position of the responsible officer, right? The responsible officer is like the primary custodian of all the equipment. So like all that equipment is assigned to me. All the vehicles are assigned to me. I need to make sure as a responsible officer that all my equipment is operational. And in the Marine Corps, in the infantry unit and the maintenance like realm, 80% and above was operational, right? We also had like different categories like deadline that vehicle was not operational at all. And then we have like operational degraded where it's operational, it's just degraded a little bit and it's still functional, right? You can still use this stuff, but you got to be very careful. So these responsible officers and commodity managers, right? Like they're supposed to be responsible to make sure that all the equipment is operational, that all the checks are done, that the parts and maintenance parts that are needed are on order, and that supply and maintenance is tracking this stuff, when it's going to arrive, and when it arrives, like are they doing the maintenance that day? Like if it's a priority 3, like a priority 3 is like, you know, the highest priority, um, they're supposed to make sure that all this stuff gets there. And yes, the maintenance manager is not doing that stuff for the responsible officers, but he's supposed to be the liaison for them and supply to make sure that our maintenance readiness for everything is 80% or above, right? Like that is the job of the maintenance officer. He's supposed to track the stuff end to end, make sure that the parts are getting put in the equipment, that we're managing our layettes and our perpetual inventories properly. Nothing is sitting for over like 48 hours, 96 hours. When we got the part, why haven't we put it on? What's the timeline to get this equipment on there to make sure that's operational? You got to test it, right? Do your checks, and the responsible officers and command managers kind of work hand in hand with them. So yeah, I mean, it's a big thing. So, and the next one says ineffective internal inspections. And as I told you guys, as supply, I always did my semi-annual internal inspections. I always did my internal inspections January and June. January and June. That's aside from the FASMO that you're going to get every other year and the logistics readiness evaluation at First Marine Division that you're going to get that year that you don't get the FASMO, right? So the one-off year. So you get LRE, FASMO, LRE, FASMO. And I always did my internal inspections. I did 2 internal inspections, and then I would get an assist visit from my higher up or another entity that would come over, take a look at, like, run through the checklist and make sure that we are compliant with all the questions that goes in there. So the last one says, and failure to follow up on identified discrepancies. Guys, like when things are identified and they're non-compliant, we have to go back and fix those things and show that we fixed them, we know what we're doing, and going forward we won't make that mistake again, or you know, those discrepancies are getting fixed and we've identified the issue, we've done the training, whatever the course may be. So it says the battalion was the only one in the 1st Marine Division to be found non-compliant and one of 7 units in the Marine Expeditionary Force to fail the inspection. Guys, Phasmo, I'm telling you, Phasmo, it's a big deal. And I don't know about today, but when I was in, just over 7 years, it was a huge deal. It was a career ender for us, right? Commanders would possibly get relief, supply officers, maintenance officers, people would get relief for this stuff depending on the severity. Guys, at the 1st Marine Division, there's like 26 units. There's a whole bunch of units there. They are the only one that failed the inspection. Did that not ring any like ears? Like did people just kind of like, oh wow, like no, to fail this inspection, it's a huge freaking deal. And they were the only one to fail that inspection. They were the only one to be found non-compliant. It says findings from a 2018 and 2020 logistics readiness evaluation showed a similar decline in the 3rd AA battalion. So guys, like here's the trend. 2018, the logistics readiness evaluation, as I've discussed, is the one that you get one every other year, right? And then the Phasmo is that year that skips the one or the other. So the LRE, they were like, hey, you guys are doing shit wrong. Hey, you guys need to step it up. 2019, they get Phasmo and they're non-compliant. It's like somebody should have been fired at that point. The supply officer, maintenance officer, S4 officer, like heads should have been rolling at this point. And then in 2020, they failed another LRE, another logistics readiness evaluation. Guys, when we fail the logistics readiness evaluation or the Phasmo, we have to go brief a freaking 2-star general, the general at the division, or we send our results up the chain, and then we do a brief as to why we were fucked up, and then what we're doing to fix that stuff, right? So like this is huge. It says that document included ordnance training not conducted, required shop safety classes, maintenance training not conducted, required clerk or supervisor training, and quality control assigned personnel not documenting final inspections according to the investigation. In addition to the failures, a reorganization of the battalion put the AAVs into the battalion's headquarters and service company, a company that did not have an assigned maintenance officer or master sergeant maintenance chief, with the idea that the battalion level officer and the chief would provide oversight. So yeah, the restructure, I mean, yeah, so that's just unfortunate. The 3rd A Battalion maintenance officer stated that he did not think that he would need to provide maintenance oversight to HNS company, headquarters and service company, since he was a battalion maintenance officer and the company maintenance officer, not the company maintenance officer, the recent investigation found. That's complete bullshit. That's a fucking cop-out. Like, that maintenance officer, like, his job is to manage maintenance for the battalion. Exactly. He's the battalion maintenance officer, not the company maintenance officer. Dude, the company falls under the freaking battalion, right? Guys, as I discussed, at the battalion level, you have your headquarters and service company, you have your 3 companies, and if you have like a 4th one, like if you're at an infantry unit, you have your headquarters and service company, you have your Echo, Fox, Golf company, the infantry companies, and then you have your weapons company. So the 3rd AA battalion has 3 companies: Alpha, Bravo, and Delta. Okay, so yeah, it's a little bit different from like the infantry battalion, right? Because the infantry battalion has the weapons company. So this company has the 3 companies for AAVs, and then it has the HNS company, which is part of the battalion. So that maintenance officer should have been involved with their maintenance, especially because they don't have the specialties, right? Like you don't assign freaking a weapons company equipment to the HNS company and expect them to be able to service it and maintenance it when they're not the experts, right? The experts are at that level wherever they're supposed to be at. In this case, like the maintenance management officer for the battalion should have been responsible in making sure that the maintenance was conducted, like everything was in order for that company. And guys, at 2nd Battalion, 4th Marines, we would have our maintenance meetings with the commanding officer, all the company commanders for each company, all the staff that's required, like the S6, the S4, your communications, your logistics, your mortar T, your armory. Everybody goes into that maintenance meeting, and we brief the commanding officer on the status of his equipment, how much money we spent, where are the parts, are they on order, are they on the way, how long is it going to take to install this stuff, what else do we need? These are all like the things that should have been happening at this unit. All right, and then it says, despite the battalion's maintenance woes, it boasted a readiness rate of 84% between January 2020 and April 2020, higher than the Marine Corps average of 71% over the same period. Guys, is that not just like everything I've just discussed? They were the only Marine Corps unit to fail the freaking FASMO or to be non-compliant at the 1st Marine Division. The only one, and one of 7 units in the MEF to fail this freaking inspection. And so technically they failed 3 inspections in a row, right? The 2 logistics readiness evaluations and the FASMO. And then they're showing a way higher percentage of maintenance readiness. Obviously they're fudging the numbers. They're lying on their sheets of what is actually operational, or maybe they just don't have an understanding of what operational readiness is, like what the deadline equipment is. Like maybe they don't know the differences, right? I don't know. But like that should have been a big red flag. They're like, hold on, you failed 3 inspections and now you're saying that you have a higher readiness than the average in the Marine Corps. Like, what? That just doesn't make any sense to me. And then it says, but the readiness numbers did not translate to working vehicles for the Marine Expeditionary Unit. Again, so the AAV battalion, the AA battalion, boasted a readiness of 84%, and the Marine Corps average was 71%. That's crazy. All right. It says the Marine Corps initial investigation found that the vehicles slated for the deployment had come from the administrative deadline lot, while 12 of the initial 13 vehicles originally slated for the MU were non-operational on April 20th. Guys, when something like this happens, like, people throw red flags, right? Like, if I was their supply officer, I'd be like, fuck no, we're not taking that equipment. Like, I'm going to go tell my battalion commander. My battalion commander is going to call his freaking boss, and they're going to make some shit happen and get us equipment that's operational, because guess what? They need it because they're going on the MU. They are going on the deployment. They need this stuff to be operational 100% to be able to go contingency response force, humanitarian assistance, whatever they're going to go do, they need it to be 100%. So they will leave the shitty equipment that's not operational with the units there to fix on land. They will fix it and then they will use it for their training, which is what should have happened, not giving them 12 vehicles that didn't work. Like, that's crazy. The initial investigation, based on their findings on witness statements, citing the maintenance records, the second investigation disputes the claims that the vehicles came from the deadline lot, and found that only 5 of the 13 vehicles were non-operational. So initially there were 12, then there was 5. Wishy-washy back and forth. The second investigation noted that 11 of the 14 vehicles ultimately sent to the MU were non-operational at various points. So, they were operational and then something happened, they were not operational, but these things were sitting at a lot, at a deadline lot, a lot where they're like, hey, these vehicles aren't operational. Like, that should have been red flag number 1. Also, when equipment goes from one unit to another unit, there's supposed to be joint limited technical inspections that are done on all the equipment that's going over, right? There's a person from this unit, and then there's a person from that unit, or more than one person, and then go through that checklist together, and they're like, does this work? Yes. Does this work? No. Does this work? No. If everything's compliant, we annotate that, right? And then we're like, hey, we're gonna accept this gear from this unit to the other unit. If they don't, then there's other things that happen, like, hey, well, we need to order these parts. Who's paying for that stuff, right? Whoever accepted these vehicles, all that stuff should have been annotated. All that stuff should have been reported to their commanding officer. That commanding officer should have been like, hey, what the fuck are we doing? We're getting fucking broken gear and we're supposed to go on a deployment? Like that, leave the broken gear here, take the operational gear there. A lot of the times what happens is that people or the units don't want to give up their operational gear, right? They're like, no, this is our stuff. We want all the good stuff for ourselves. And then, they give all the shitty stuff to another unit. All right. Despite having nearly 200 vehicles to choose from, with a supposedly 84% operational readiness. So, guys, yeah, they had over 200 vehicles, and they gave them fucking 11 of them that were just fucked. Like, that's crazy. And that kind of goes back to what I was saying. Like, they keep all the good vehicles for themselves, for their training and for, like, less maintenance, less work for these guys. But then they leave all this shit on the lots. They're not being worked on. They're not being maintained routinely. Like, they're kind of just putting it on the back burner, and disregarded. Before the Marine Expedition Unit, the platoon's leadership tried to get new vehicles but were rebuffed by the battalion, according to one of the witness statements. I was told, this was from I think this was the gunny, I was told that they didn't have any other vehicles to give us, and those were the vehicles we were going to get no matter what. The platoon maintenance chief said that in the initial investigation. So, guys, like that just blows, because like I always had a straight line to my XO and my CO, my executive officer and the commanding officer. And the fact that these guys just blew them off like that just means they didn't really have a good relationship with their team. They maybe didn't know how to communicate this stuff, and that's just unfortunate. But that happens a lot more than you guys think. The second investigation did not answer why only those vehicles would do. Frankly, quote unquote, I don't know I don't know, and the investigation officer made particular note of that nothing should have prevented the battalion from sourcing other vehicles to meet this requirement. Absolutely. Like nothing should have stopped them. Guys, they are the front lines. Like when a unit is going to like the front lines, they take all the good stuff. And if they don't have the good stuff, they throw a bitch fit, which they should, to like the general at the First Marine Division or whoever their boss, and then they're like, "Hey, we need this gear. We don't have this gear," and people fucking start making shit happen, and they source them that stuff that they need. All right, it says training issues. The original Marine Corps investigation found that the 3rd AA Battalion failed to conduct the Marine Corps Combat Readiness Evaluation, commonly known as the MCRE. So that changed during that time. It was kind of going away from being called the MCRE, but it was still the same concept, still the same training. And the Marine Corps Combat Readiness Evaluation is an evaluation that all of these units do to show the 1st Marine Division or whatever division they're at and the general, like, hey, we are ready for combat. We are ready for whatever you are going to throw at us. And it's a series of exercises, and depending how they do it, it could be a week long. For us, our MCRE was a 6-week long operation, and a lot of you may know we go to 29 Palms. It's called ITX as well. And yeah, you guys hang out at 29 Palms for 6 weeks. You guys do all kinds of training. You hit all the requirements that you're supposed to hit, and you show the division that, hey, we're ready for combat. So it says this exercise is meant to push units through a realistic training, ensuring that they have the skills and equipment needed for deployment. Absolutely. According to the 1st Marine Division orders, the responsibility for evaluating the units would fall to the battalion commander for 3rd AA Battalion. That was Bernese, the lieutenant colonel there. However, both Bernese and the AAV platoon commander told the investigators that they did not know a MCRE was required for a platoon-sized unit to deploy, believing those were the only required for companies, which is kind of weird. When we got our combat engineers attached to us, they went with us down to 29 Palms to do the MCRE. So I mean, that's kind of weird that they said that they didn't know. Guys, at the battalion level, you have your operations officer, you have your training officer, you have your executive officer, you have your sergeant major, your commanding officer. You're telling me none of these people knew that they were supposed to do a Marine Corps Combat Readiness Evaluation? I don't know. That seems a little weird. Like that's also like a cop out. It says orders and authoritative documents from headquarters Marine Corps down to and including the battalion level plainly direct that the major elements forming a Marine Expedition Unit will conduct a MCRE prior to composite, Mundy said in the investigation. Yeah, it says that the major elements, like the battalion landing team, which is made up of those detachments from those units, the artillery, the engineers, the AAVs, all get attached. Even the pilots that get attached to the infantry unit, they're all part of the battalion landing team. I remember our pilots that we got, they did like the hikes and they did everything with us. Like they were part of the training that we were supposed to do, the Marine Corps Combat Readiness Evaluation. They were part of that training. I remember that because they didn't make them hike as much because these guys weren't ready. They didn't do all the pre-deployment workup that we were supposed to do. It says some of these documents are ambiguous regarding the requirements for units below the battalion and squadron levels, but I believe the spirit of these orders is clear in that all units deploying with the MU should receive some type of formal evaluation by competent authority. The training records reviewed by the second investigation showed that the lieutenant colonel of the AA battalion conducted the McCrees for companies deploying, but they seem to show that they were never conducted for platoons heading to the MU. So they apparently did the companies, but they didn't do it for the platoons, which is interesting because if they did the companies, then the platoons were part of that company. The lack of McCrees for AAV platoons seemed to be the norm in the Marine Corps, despite the orders requiring them. So, yeah, it's just saying that the AAV platoons, it was not uncommon for them to not have like the Marine Corps combat readiness evaluation or not be part of that or have that training complete. The reports in the Marine Corps Training Information Management System, they would call it MCTIS, do not have any data that AA platoons in the Marine Corps conducted McCrees, the investigation noted. So, very interesting. Instead of preparing for deployment, the unit seemed to prioritize Native Fury, which is a joint exercise that took place in the United Arab Emirates, whatever that shit is, excuse me. All right, which allowed the Marines to train on the ground-based functions of the AAV, but did not consist of any waterborne training. So, Native Fury, the joint exercise, they were doing training with AAVs on land, but not on water. That's pretty much all it's saying. The issues with prioritizing the exercise in the Middle East was compounded when flight cancellations in the wake of COVID-19 left half the platoon in Camp Pendleton, California during the exercise. Yeah, guys, this was all during COVID-19. And, if you were like positive for COVID, like you had a quarantine for 2 weeks and then you'd get tested again. And if you were still positive, you'd sit in quarantine for longer. It was just a big mess. And when we went to Japan, we had a quarantine 2 weeks prior to getting on the plane. And then we had a quarantine 2 weeks after we landed, and they would come around when we were like in our rooms, they would come around, freaking swab us. And 3 days later, they would tell us like, "Hey, you're good to get out of your room, or you're shit out of luck, and we'll come test you again in a few days." So it was really a mess. And during our deployment, nobody ever even got off the ships. I didn't even go on the ship. I was on the island the whole time. But those that went on the ships, they're supposed to get off and do exercise and do all these things, but they didn't because of COVID. And what happened was that they just sat on the ships the entire time. They sat on the ships the entire time, and they didn't want to risk getting off, getting COVID, quarantining, getting everybody on ship sick. Yeah, so it was like a big deal. It says when the first half that were actually able to participate in the Native Fury returned, they were immediately put into a 2-week restriction movement period to prevent potential spread of COVID-19. But it is also prevented them from assisting with the necessary maintenance on the vehicles that were issued in the weeks immediately before they joined the MU. That's just unfortunate, right? So just like what happened to us, they got back and they're like, "Hey, you guys are in quarantine 2 weeks. Hang out and play Call of Duty." It says, "I believe this was a critical decision that later contributed to the AA platoon's performance on July 30th, 2020, which is when the day that the AAV sank. The NF-20 deployment did not permit the platoon to conduct adequate pre-composite waterborne training together as a small unit and potentially with Company B, or to conduct thorough inspections prior to the JLTI." Guys, just like how I described earlier, a JLTI is a joint limited technical inspection where the two entities, the gaining and the issuing command, their people are there and they go through a checklist together to make sure they document everything that's operational, everything that's not operational, if they're going to accept the gear or not accept the gear, because sometimes it doesn't make sense. Like if it's going to take, 8 months to fix the gear, then why are we fucking taking it with us on the ship? Why are we taking it with us on deployment? Because guess what? We're not going to get it fixed. It's just going to sit on the freaking boat the entire time. All right. So it says next category is the rose tinted glasses. The investigation found that Bernese and Castavelli, so the Lieutenant Colonel of AA Battalion and the Lieutenant General 1st Marine Division, had ample personal communication, but noted that the Lieutenant Colonel from AA Battalion routinely failed to inform the commander about the reality of his battalion. So they're saying that the Lieutenant Colonel from AA Battalion wasn't transparent with Lieutenant General Castavelli, which was the General of 1st Marine Division. They communicated a lot, but I guess the Lieutenant Colonel just didn't communicate that to him. It says that Lieutenant Colonel Bernese did not convey the significant risk in his command related to the amphibious assault platoon specifically in declining material readiness and lack of pre-deployment waterborne training opportunities and McCree or other formal evaluation. Instead, the reports were generally positive and contained very few indications that would have altered the commanding general or his staff personnel training and material readiness concerns. Bernizzi left the battalion June 19, 2020, just 11 days before the fatal accident. So he is currently under Training and Education Command. The administrative actions against him are still ongoing. So he was relieved of duty, though. So I guess the lieutenant colonel of the battalion had left shortly prior, 11 days prior to the fatal incident. Just very sad of how these things happen. But like the way it works is you get orders, and you're supposed to execute them at a certain time, and it's just unfortunate that they didn't really pass like the proper communication right from chain of command. Like, hey, we aren't getting the proper support we're needed. Hey, we failed 3 inspections in a row. Like, if that's not signaling something, then I don't know what is, right? There was a lot of things that were missed by this unit that maybe they just didn't care enough. I don't know what it was, but man, when I was at 2nd Battalion, 4th Marines, we would get freaking rolled pretty hard. There's this article here that says that the maintenance Marines were working from like 05 to midnight every day. And yeah, I remember our maintenance guys were working that freaking late. Like, I remember they were up early and they were freaking, going to sleep late because for us, when we go to the 31st MEU, all of that gear is already over there for us, like I said. But we still need to give this gear to somebody else that we have right now in Camp Pendleton. So we give it to another unit. They train with it. We go, we take the gear on over there. We do our inspections. We do our joint inspections with them, and then we hand off the gear. We'll pay for the stuff, or there's budget set aside to make sure that the maintenance parts are ordered, and they're able to get this stuff maintenance ready or operational ready, right? 80% or higher in that category. So yeah, it says the final evaluation, the AAV crew on the sinking AV had only been put together on July 27, 3 days before the sinking, because of normal rear crewmen in the vehicle tested positive for COVID-19. So they kind of just threw these people together and were like, hey, kind of figure it out. Especially in an exercise like this, like it's kind of crazy for them to do that. Like where was the staff sergeant? Where's the lieutenant? Where was the captain? Where was the major? Where was the staff here, right? Like they're all absent, it seems like. So very unfortunate here. And I'll post these articles down there for you guys so you guys completely read this. But it says the entire AAV platoon assigned to the 15th MEU was missing the required training before deployment. Several crews had been hastily thrown together, and none had spent much time in the water in the months leading up to the sinking. So like they weren't training, they weren't ready for that exercise, and it seems like if it was rushed. Yeah, and it seems like the platoon that was assigned to the MEU in January of 2020 only had 4 months to prepare for the coming before coming under the MEU's command. The AV platoon sergeant said, "I did not feel that my platoon was ready to become part of the 15th MEU, at least not right off the bat in January." And guys, if you're in the service, or if you don't know, in November, December, everything kind of winds down. People start taking leave. It's like it's like a ghost town in the Marine Corps during this time, because people are taking leave, they're traveling, they're you get so many days off during this time that you send an email, you may not get a response until the new year, and that's how a lot of this stuff was. So that's very interesting that they kind of threw this together in January, and they're like, hey, come the new year, you guys are over there, and figure it out. So yeah, that's just very unfortunate events that happen, right? Like it's crazy that like they pulled these vehicles off the deadline lot. Nobody said anything. So, but being in a position that was directly impacted to that, being able to speak to that, like it hopefully gives you a different perspective, right? Because when we were on 2nd Battalion, 4th Marines as the battalion landing team 2-4 at the 31st MEU, once this happened, it was like a halt, right? And like I said before, it was a halt. None of our AAVs were able to get in the water. They had to pass new checklist requirements, and like none of our AAVs passed. I don't even think our AAVs went on water the entire time. I don't even think they went on the boat. I'm pretty sure that lieutenant was on the island with me the entire time. So it definitely is a very like interesting thing. I remember ordering hundreds of thousands of dollars to pay for the new tracks, to pay for the gear, the maintenance parts, replacements parts. We had like a crazy budget when we were on the 31st MEU, and they just kept throwing money at us. They're like, how much do you need? We need you guys to fix all this stuff. We need you to place the orders. We need you to track the maintenance parts. And so we're just kind of like, okay, like we're buying these parts that these vehicles need, and the maintenance guys are doing their maintenance, and they're working long as hours. I mean, when we were there, we were working like 16-hour days, and I'm sure they were working just as much, if not even more. But being in supply, knowing the severity and the dire need of like being on top of your shit, especially failing 3 inspections. I'm surprised their supply officer still had a job. Their maintenance officer had a job. I'm surprised none of them. Maybe they had negative fit reps. But these things like they're not they shouldn't be easily looked over, man. I remember I was always sweating balls when like we're getting an investigation, right? Like or we're getting our evaluation or an inspection. And but I mean, up until a point where I was like kind of already seasoned and I already gone through like 6 or 7 of these, I was like, I'm not too worried about them because I know we're doing the right things. I've done my internal inspections, I do my semi-annual inspections, and I got assist from my regiment. They came down and inspect us, and we're doing good. Like if there's anything that we missed, then we'll fix that stuff. But for the most part, like we were doing hot stuff, right? So it's very unfortunate. Like the big piece for me that hit home was like the maintenance of supply. Like what are we doing? Like how are you gonna say that it's not your guys' responsibility? Like it's my duty to support these guys to make sure that their equipment's operational. And if it hasn't arrived, if it's taking 6 weeks, 6 months for that gear to get here, my job as supply is to make sure I call them. What's going on with these parts? Why is it going to take 6 months? Why is it going to take 8 months for that part to get here? Is there replacement parts? Can we get replacement parts? I remember we had like a radiator for one of the vehicles blow out at one point when I was at 2-4, and we couldn't get a replacement part. It was going to be like 8 months for that thing to get here, and we're like, 8 months? We can't wait fucking 8 months. So we like used our credit card and we outsourced it, and we got it in like a week. Like those are the things that the maintenance management officer, the supply officer, these support entities are supposed to be doing for these guys to make sure like, hey, why isn't your equipment operational? The commander has said that we need to make sure this stuff is operational. We need to work as a team. We need to make sure we get you your parts. You tell me what parts you need. Tell me what replacement parts. If you can't get those initial parts, tell me the replacement parts. Like let's work on this together. Let's get you all the gear that you need so that you guys are ready for combat. So I mean, I know when I was at 2nd Battalion, 4th Marines, we bought all kinds of stuff, and we made sure we made it happen. We made sure our guys had good communications equipment. We had good headsets. We had new ropes when they're doing um, their from the helo, right? When they're coming down on the ropes, we made sure that those things were fresh. We made sure that the freaking the water training, that the boats were good. We made sure that like everything was good. Like it's crazy, but that that comes together once you guys are on that deployment. You guys have been training for this stuff for a year longer. Your dwell time, our dwell time at 2-4 was like 2 years. I was there for a year and a half, and then we deployed, right? So um, I was so comfortable with my peers, the lieutenants, the captains, the XO, the CO. I could walk in their door and let them know what's happening, and that's just the relationship I had with them. Like we were like brothers, the brotherhood, right? It wasn't just a friendship. It wasn't just like, hey, what's up? Like no, it's like, hey, what do you guys need? You guys are going out there. What do you need? Tell me what you need. Can I get it for you? What can I do for you guys? That was my job as supply. My job was to never say no. My job was to make sure that I could get to a yes. And same thing with my maintenance officer, right? The maintenance officer, God bless their souls, because they worked with me hand to hand. And these guys were like we were like in a relationship at that point. So we worked hand in hand, and that was our job. Our job was to make sure that these guys were ready for combat, because they are the front lines, right? Like I'm over here making sure we get our supply parts, we get all our maintenance parts, and then it's the maintenance responsibility to make sure that these parts get put on and that they're operational, so that these guys can go on the front lines and do what they got to do, and kick butt. So yeah, guys, I'm gonna post the links below if you guys want to go take a look at that and read it yourself. yeah, thank you for watching, and I hope that gave you some insight. Thanks, guys. Sorry for the long video. If you liked it, please like, subscribe, and if you want more content, stay tuned. And if you have any other comments, I'd like to hear your guys' comments below into what happened, if you were part of that, if you were around during that time. I'd like to hear your perspective, because honestly, my heart sinks every time I see something like this. All right, thanks, guys. Have a good day.